So thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Now, despite what you might see based on these chat logs, this is not going to be about CNBC. I talked to them a couple of weeks ago about Amtrak fares, how the Northeast Corridor fares specifically, the intercity rail fares are much higher than fares for intercity rail in Japan and especially in Western Europe. And it was talking about issues like operating costs and how essentially Amtrak needs to be subsidizing very unprofitable long distance trains with these fares. But no, as I said, it's not the subject of this book. The subject of this video is something completely different, which is UI UX on public transportation. Now, now I'm pretty sure that the terminology UI UX comes from tech. So user interface and user experience, these are things that are important whenever there's anything that faces, I want to say the general public, but even something that's purely business to business. There's such a thing as user interface and user experience, but the terminology UI UX, as I understand it, is mostly a tech terminology for where let's say there's the interface here, where in OBS, it's the interface that I use to directly stream directly stream my my vlogging on Twitch, and there's also recording here, which also saves a recording locally on my computer, which I then upload to YouTube. This is like a really dumb example of UI. Now, the concept of UI UX really, as I said, is for really anything that interfaces customers, and even when the customers are pure businesses, not just the general public. But public transportation literally is for the general public. Like the definition of public transportation is that it is open to the public. It's not that it's owned by the public. The Tokaido Shinkansen is at intercity scale public transportation, even though JR Central is a private firm. The Denentoshi line in the suburbs of Tokyo is public transportation, even though it is owned by the private company Tokyu, a private company that has never been public. This is not some kind of public thing that has been privatized, so you can say, oh, maybe it's public education, but it's a charter. No, this has always been private, for profit. It's still public transportation, because maybe not I in Berlin, but but if I'm visiting Tokyo, I can just ride these trains paying a ticket. It's not like these are private cars only to club members or something. And so making sure that the interface is very good is important, and it's also something that's very underrated. Now, why is it underrated? Because the answer is that you do not notice good UI and you do not notice good UX. It's something that public transit agencies. So let's start with the concept of complaints. Actually, this maybe gets more into customer service, but it kind of showcases why UI UX gets underrated so much. Public transport agencies understand that they're never going to get positive feedback at scale. They might occasionally hear something really good. There are always sappy stories about, let's say, people who met their partners on a train, or people who take a picture from a train that is pretty, or maybe a tourist comes to a country and finds its trains finds its trains efficient compared with what they are familiar with at home. But that's not at scale. Berlin, by all accounts, has good public transportation. I'm not going to say excellent. I'm going to say good, and we're going to get into one example in which it fails to be excellent. But Berliners don't constantly think, "Oh, we have great public transportation." No, they constantly complain. Why? Because working is the normal state of a system. Perturbations tend to be negative rather than positive. So it's not like you normally, let's say, expect your trip to take 15 minutes, but sometimes it runs faster and it only takes 10. That is not how public transport works ever. No, normally, let's say that the average time is 14 minutes and 20% of the time there's a perturbation. It's not going to be 80% of the time 15 and then 20% of the time is going to be 10. No, it's going to be 80% of the time is going to be 13 and 20% of the time is going to be 18. In the schema, the perturbations are practically always against you. So it's delays. It's trains that are not working the way they should. In a way, the public transit system, as it is conceived on maps, in popular timetables and so on, is an idealized state in which the system as it is approaches but will invariably fall short of, and the idea is to have it fall short by as little as possible. So the fewest delays, the fewest breakdowns, the fewest accidents, of course, the fewest adverse service changes, and so because of that, because of that concept where working is the normal way, where the way the skewness works essentially is that, again, change is practically always negative. It means that you're going to get a lot of complaints. Agencies, as a result, understand internally that the existence of complaints does not mean that they're doing a bad job. Thinner-skinned ones will say that you should also praise the agency because it's already getting too much slagging from the general public. I see this in American activism all the time. That people say that you should not slag on agencies because these are hardworking civil servants. But the point is that because public commentary will almost always be negative, things that work are usually invisible. Now, this is especially true of UI UX. What I mean is that if the train is fast, it can be noticed because the train is so absolute speed is never noticeable, I should say. What is noticeable is relative improvement. So the opening of a new high-speed line is noticed. Okay, people in France notice that the French trains are fast because maybe new LGVs are being opened so they can compare with the past. And in Germany, to the extent Germany builds high-speed lines, which it doesn't as much as France does, frequency is very visible because you can see the arrival board. In Berlin, I see the arrival board. This is also a really important example of UI. It means that I know when the next train is coming. I don't need to speculate. If I'm frustrated that I don't see the train, the sign tells me when the next train is going to come. And if the sign is reliable, which it practically always is, then it gives me a certain peace of mind. And you might think that peace of mind is this fuzzy, unquantifiable vibe, but actually it isn't. And here is my standard reference on this, which is going to be actually about bus shelter. But it's not just about bus shelter. So so my standard reference in this is the paper of Fan, Guthrie, and Levinson. Now, they mostly look at bus shelter, but you might notice here that you might notice that they're looking at perceived waiting time. So this is the actual waiting time, and this is the perceived waiting time by whether there is shelter, and whether there is a real-time info sign, like a sign that says that the bus is definitely going to come in, let's say, 4 minutes. And you might notice that the effect of these two things, that is bench and shelter, and real-time info are actually pretty similar. Not exactly the same. You would rather have a bench and a shelter and not the real-time info. Lower is better, but um, it's pretty close. Um, you can. I mean, if you're actually waiting 10 minutes, then people perceive the wait as maybe a little more than 20 with nothing, and then um, one out of the two, let's say bench shelter counting as one, or real time info cuts you from maybe 21 to 15, and having all of them cuts you to about 11. Um, so it's somewhat worse than the factor of 1.5 improvement in perception of wait time, just because um, there is just because you can know in advance how long you need to wait. This is really important. Again, though, this is for buses and not trains. Um, with trains, it's less important if the trains have a consistent paper schedule. What I mean by paper schedule, if I'm on, let's say, a regional train, um, then I know when it's going to come because maybe the train comes every hour. And so I don't just show up at the station whenever and say, oh, I need to wait another 47 minutes. No, I don't do that. I don't like waiting 47 minutes for a train. I don't even like waiting 7 minutes for a train. I see when the train comes and I make sure to get to the station 4 minutes before the train leaves. And so uh, and so maybe the sign at an intercity train station telling me that the regional train is actually arriving reinforces that, and there's no delay relative to the paper schedule, but the paper schedule is for the most part reliable. Whereas if it's a subway train that comes every 12 minutes, as in New York City, and the 12 minutes can happen whenever, it's kind of annoying if I don't know when during the 12-minute period I've arrived. If I'm just entering the station, I need to know whether I need to make a run for it. I need to know whether I should take out my phone and tell people that I'm going to be 10 minutes late because it's an 11-minute wait. And so just clarifying the reliability of the system, or lack thereof, is really useful. Now, I want to make it very clear that this is important, but it's not everything. And here's an example of how it's not everything. New York City installed these recently. In New York, when I moved to New York, it was 2006, there were no such signs, no real-time arrival signs anywhere. I believe that when I left the city in 2011, they started putting them. They were planning on putting these signs at every station on the A division, aka the IRT, aka the lines that have numbers on them as opposed to letters. I'm forgetting whether the 7 was also in the 7 is IRT and A division, but I think that I'm forgetting whether the 7 had the same signal system that they were hooking this into on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I believe by maybe 2013, 2012, 2013, it was complete. And then they used something different. I'm forgetting the technology. I believe I actually talked to the company that did it. But it was a different technology. To do it on all other lines, on the lettered lines. So this is something that has been installed recently. And I gotta tell you, the impact on ridership has not been very visible. Now, part of it is that these are, especially on the lettered lines, not very reliable. The signs on the numbered lines are more reliable, but part of it is also that, again, UI, UX, I say it is important. It is a second order. It is important second order, not first order. So you want, again, you want people to so you want customers to know when the train is coming. Conversely, you want to actually be reliable to the customer. And reliability is not UI. Reliability is how reliable you are. This is first order in importance, avoiding breakdowns, avoiding unnecessary changes. In New York, when I was just in New York for 3 weeks. This is the first time I'm streaming since I came back to Berlin, because I was on the road a week ago, and on the rails, but you know what I mean. And I noticed during the 19 days I was in the city, I think 11 trips. So 19 days I took, I don't know, 50-ish subway trips, and I think 11 of them had something pretty bad going on with reliability. Like, the trains were running a lot slower than the usual, or the frequency was worse than intended, and the intended frequency of peak was already pretty bad. There was a medical emergency at one point. Like, someone was having a seizure, so they took everyone off the train except the person with the seizure, and the train drove off, and they put us on the next train. It's one of the things. In New York, they keep talking about all their medical emergencies, and I mean, I live in Berlin. I don't think the state of public health in Berlin is massively better than in New York City. I think the life expectancies in Berlin and New York are probably actually about the same. New York has way higher life expectancy than the rest of the United States. Germany has one of the worst life expectancies in Western Europe. I think Germany only has pre-corona about 2 years on the US. The better countries have like 4 years on the US. New York has 2 years on the US. Like, it's not obvious that New York should have more medical emergencies than Berlin. Berlin also has a much more accessible system than New York, so you should expect people with worse health profile to be using the trains in Berlin. I don't think I've ever seen a medical emergency on a train here. I imagine if someone's having a seizure, they will move this person off the train, rather than keeping them on the train so the train can drive off to wherever. So again, this is reliability. This is something much more important, but UI UX is important in other ways. And again, it's underrated, and especially on buses where you're not waiting at an enclosed station. You're waiting at a station without amenities. You don't know what's going on. If there's a high crime rate, then you're going to be really anxious, especially if you're a woman. To be very clear, what the study says is that they did a 2x2 matrix, men, women, lower half, upper half by reported crime rate among the stations, and it intersects in that it doesn't matter for men. For women react exactly the same as men in the bottom half of stations by reported crime rate, and then the top half, it is this versus this. So especially when it's a long wait, not when it's a short wait, it doesn't matter. And the point is that because nobody is going to come home and say, oh, the wayfinding was very good, or the audio announcements were very clear. Nobody ever says that, right? I mean, do you think there are people who like the London Underground? I was in London the weekend before last, so maybe I'm thinking about that more. Or the Berlin U-Bahn. People will say things about, ooh, it's very convenient, or, oh, I don't need to deal with cars and with city traffic. They might even praise the fact that the train comes every 5 minutes in Berlin and every 3 minutes in central London. Do you think anyone ever praises wayfinding, or the clarity of announcements, or and so because of that, people don't get how useful these design questions are until they just see them fail. And I bring this up because it's something that I was aware was important, but the problem is it only hits me when I visit New York. And the reason it hits me when I visit New York is that, as I mentioned, people don't notice this until it screws up. I'm used to higher quality UI in Berlin, and then when I visit New York, I see very shoddy UX. So instead of just defining UX, I'm just going to give you concrete examples. So I mentioned already that in New York, the arrival signs on the lettered lines of the subway, B division, inherited from the historic BMT and IND, BMT being fundamentally the lettered lines where the letter is J or onward in the alphabet, I and D being A through G. I'm slightly lying, but only slightly. So it's a different signal system on the B division. So the signals are not the signals. Sorry, the signs are less reliable. So yeah, it's one of the things that I noticed. But here are some more examples of things that I noticed. First of all, there's auditory overload. This is not UI, this is UX. What I mean by auditory overload is that I can get pretty sensitive to noise, especially when it's not noise that I can tune out. There's the din of the subway, of people on the subway. That's something that's actually pretty easy to tune out. Now, it's easier to tune out when I'm not as fluent in the language, but even when I am, as in New York, I tune it out. It's fine. I mean, occasionally there's a panhandler on the subway, but even that, I mean, every person who has ridden the subway in New York more than about 10 times has seen a panhandler. Every person who's ridden it more than about 20 has learned to tune them out. Even if you give them money, like even if you, let's say, give money to a busker, essentially it's a voluntary act. In most cases. And I don't mean voluntary in the sense that you're not being robbed. I mean in the sense that even noticing the busker is something that you do voluntarily. It doesn't hit you. But the announcements do hit me is a problem. Now, I like it when the announcements hit me when they say what station this is, or if there's a transfer, or if there's a service change that I need to know about. Yeah, absolutely. Tell me that. So as I said, UX. So the UX is the auditory announcement. The UI is the process in which they're being generated. And one of the well-known problems on the New York City subway is that the manual announcements, that is to say, a station manager or I guess a station agent, I don't think it's a manager who says that, or a train conductor says something, and that often comes garbled. There are YouTube videos that I'm not going to dig right now, both because I last saw them about 13 years ago, and because if I go on YouTube, as I mentioned, it was 13 years ago, I don't know if they've been taken out, so it's possible you will just see how much video game streaming, how much video game challenge running, and how much schlock 1970s music I watch on YouTube. But you can look for them. It's about garbled New York subway announcements. Again, everyone in New York knows this. The automated ones are better, so that is better UI. People don't say, "Oh, great! The announcements are automated, and now I can hear them." As I said, it's underrated and underappreciated. Is it the be all and end all of service? No, it absolutely isn't. But it's really important because people need to know where they're going. People need to think that the system is reliable, and that doesn't just mean that the timetables are reliable, that there are no accidents, and so on. It also means that knowing where to get off is useful. Okay, people will make mistakes and get off at the wrong stop. People don't necessarily want to have to constantly pay attention to every little detail. So you want to provide the detail in as many different ways without being louder than necessary about it. So this means auditory announcements. This means visually distinctive stations to the extent that it is possible. In Mexico City, actually, here's one really cool thing that they did. So Mexico City is a late 20th century subway. They've expanded very little in the last 15 years or 20 years. This is mostly the fault of then Mayor, now President AMLO, who preferred investing in roads. And but when they were building I think it started in the 60s and 70s, Mexico did not have universal literacy yet. There was widespread illiteracy, and so they couldn't just print the station's name because illiterates would not be able to read it. So what they did was they had visually distinct stations, I think with color, so that if you can't read so if you can't read the name of the station, you can still remember that your station is the one with the red theme or with the yellow theme or something like that. Um, you can also number the stations. It's I think more useful for tourists, but it's also useful for people who don't know the script. This is therefore very common in East Asia, where it's expected that there are many different scripts. It's not like here where practically everyone uses the Latin script. So, for example, if I'm just gonna show you the Chongqing Metro. Why Chongqing? Because I think someone was talking to me recently about the monorail there, or about the system there, and I was looking. So this is a map, which I guess is going to be a few years out of date, and China does build fast, so I imagine there's more stuff there. So don't take it as the map of the Chongqing system. Take it as part of it, but look at the lines here. So notice how the lines are numbered, and so are the stations. The stations are numbered sequentially. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You might skip a number from time to time if you are planning future info. But for the most part, it's sequential. And this, now in the case of China, it's expected that tourists will not know the script. Now, China does not have a tourism economy. This is not Thailand. But China does expect to have at least some kind of openness to tourists. I will say that I did feel like there was quite a lot of openness to tourists of this kind of system when I was in Shanghai in 2009, which was the only time I've been to, I should say the mainland, because at this point Hong Kong should count as China. I mean, it sucks, but the sovereign in China is Xi Jinping, and at this point, this is also the sovereign in Hong Kong. And it's the same thing. The stations were numbered. I think they even made announcements in English. And so tourists will not know the script, and so they number this. Again, it's also something that's in the rest of Asia. I don't know if it's Asia Pacific. I don't know if Australia does this. If it doesn't, it should. But the US needs to do that as well. Not just for tourists, although that is useful as well, but for the benefit of immigrants who speak poor English. This is I suspect it's not done because it's not part of the Western tradition to assume that people won't even be literate in your script, and therefore the stations are named, not numbered. And I suspect also that quite a lot of the concept of ESL in the United States specifically centers Hispanic immigrants, especially Mexicans, who are Spanish speakers. They know the script. But Chinese Americans, most Chinese Americans speak very good English. Even most first generation immigrants, they have high education levels, but it's not universal. And there are some who don't speak English, and the ones who don't can't even read the script often, and this is and so it's very difficult for them to figure out what station they need to be at. So good UI for them, as well as for, let's say, Chinese tourists or Japanese tourists, should be to number the stations. Again, this is kind of a side note because this is something that Berlin is really bad at as well. I don't think any Western city does this, but again, they should. The world consists of more than just countries that had mass death during Corona, and so the so there are issues of overload that I was trying to talk about, and one of the importance of overload is that if I'm not very fluent in the language, I need to make active effort to understand it. This is something that strikes me currently in German, because my current level of German is probably around B1, which means that if the announcement is clear and I'm making an effort, I will be able to, and I vaguely know the subject of what is being talked about, I will be able to understand. It doesn't mean I can follow conversation at real-time speed. Um, but it means that if I make an effort, I can understand the announcements. But for that, I need to think that the announcements are worth making an effort for, which they are in Berlin. I mean, if they're announcing that, let's say there's a service change, and as we speak, U2 has a service change. There's a section, I don't remember which one, I think from Zennefelder, something involving Zennefelderplatz, where there's a single track section. So if I hear it in an announcement, I know it's important because the announcements are of important things. Now, in New York, the announcements, yeah, they can say that there's a service change, and let's say the F is running on the E or something, but there's also a lot of craft. There's also if you see something, there's so many different PSAs about public safety that just irritate people and make them feel like they live in a police state, which the cops like. So I was told by customer service former head Sarah Meyer that she was trying to reduce the the auditory load by reducing the extent of these announcements, and one of the things and she couldn't because of a bunch of excuses made by other people, but the cops decided that they really wanted these constant "if you see something, say something" announcements, or "be careful of your belongings." This is an important message from the New York City Police Department. Now, again, nobody actually finds these important or useful, but some people like the constant reminder that they're being watched by cops. It's, instead of Big Brother is watching you, it's NYPD is watching you. But so that I should go to totalitarianism, because usually totalitarianism means some kind of autocracy or almost autocracy, like let's say Soviet kind of autocracy, but with like a party state, or before Xi Jinping, same thing in China, but something like that, but with a much more diffuse police department. And this is at the expense of making the experience of riding the subway just so much more irritating, with all these announcements are designed to be very difficult to tune out. You can tune them out if you don't speak English very well, but then you're also going to tune out important announcements. If anything, it's easier to tune out important announcements. Why? Because if you see a suspicious package, tell a police officer or an MTA employee is something that is formulaic, and so it is recorded. Now, what is not formulaic and what is not recorded? If there's a service change, let's say a medical emergency, and so and all the passengers are being shooed off the train, that is an emergency, so it's probably going to be read manually. Apparently, it's difficult to record new things, is what Sarah Meyer explained, because the trains are from like the 1990s, or sometimes even older. So so it's essentially 1990s tech, whereas if it were today, there would essentially be a smartphone controlling every car. The car costs $1 million point something. The smartphone costs several $100s. So we're talking 3.5 orders of magnitude difference. But again, it's older tech, so it was actually difficult to redo the announcements. So the actually important announcements are manual, like they're read by a human. They're harder to understand if you are not fluent in the language, because it's easier to understand the standard language, which is what you are taught, than to understand someone speaking rapidly with an accent. And then again, sometimes the announcements are garbled. So this is an auditory example. So this is something that actually, I won't say Berlin does this well, but again, it's not noticed when it's done well. I just got used to Europe, and then I'm in the United States. Let's say I was in New York this March after years of not being in the US because of Corona, and then suddenly it hits me. And it's the same thing when I visited last month. So again, this is an example of UI, of auditory UI. Now then there are other issues. There is the issue of signage. You need to make sure that the signage is very clear so passengers know where they're going. And this is sometimes less obvious than it seems. It's not just have, let's say, consistent uh, branding. So let's say consistent coloring for each line, even in cities that don't refer to lines by color. Right? In New York, um, I know one person. I know one New Yorker who refers to subway lines by colors. This person is also possibly the weirdest person that I have ever met. Um, and I mean it in a very positive way about them, by the way. But um, and everyone else who refers to subway lines by colors is a tourist. Um, and in London as well, they refer to lines by name, not color. And in Berlin, it's U8, not the blue line. And yet the lines have consistent colors as a way of aiding in recognition. Now, this is something that's pretty obvious, and yet there are subtler things about it. The subtler things is that the sign needs to be visible, so the lighting needs to be sufficient, and not just sufficient in the sense that it's not too dark, but also that the contrast is good, and that it doesn't glare in people's eyes. In New York, it's something that I didn't see this trip, but I saw it in March. I think it was at the intersection, I want to say, of the G and the L trains, that the sign of the L platform directing people to the G was really difficult to see just because the lighting was such that the G roll sign, I think, was in I think it was in the shadow of something, and there was a really bright light next to it that it was caught in the glare of, that from the angle I was at, it was very difficult to say. I had to take a photo and send to customer complaints on Twitter, just to explain to them what was going on and asking them to fix that. That was, bear in mind, it's a sign. Signs can be fixed. It requires labor, but it does require a lot of labor to move a sign or to redo a lighting, or to redo a light. This is not me slagging in New York, by the way. This is like a problem that I complained about that I hope has been fixed since. But my point is that you can get signage wrong. You need to make sure that the signage is in places where people can see. On the train, you probably will want to announce it rather than just expect the signage to work. So things like this is like, I mean, I don't think they do it in Berlin. I don't think they actually tell people that you can change to U5 and U2 at Alexanderplatz. They do tell people that you can change to the S-Bahn. They do tell people that about certain stations that you can change to trains to the airport, and that is also announced in English. Or to Hauptbahnhof. Usually they do announce the M10 tram to Hauptbahnhof. But I don't remember. I literally was at Alexanderplatz. I passed through Alexander, not just at Alexander. I passed through it on the U-Bahn, and I don't remember it being announced there. But no. As I said, it's something that's very easy not to notice unless it's screwed up. From my perspective, it will not be a screw up because I know the system in Berlin. I know its topology. I know Alexanderplatz very well. I don't need someone to tell me that there's this transfer, so I don't notice, and I don't even remember if it was there when it happened 2 hours ago, a little more than 2 hours ago. And yeah, I'm a boomer, but I mean, not that much of a boomer. I'm a millennial boomer, not an OG boomer. And I did promise that I'm going to slag on Berlin a little bit. So let's move on from questions like arrival boards, auditory announcements, and signage. Let's move on to fare payment. Fare payment maybe is less customer service-y than the things that I've mentioned so far. Now, I'm not going to talk about fares. I've blogged about this. I've vlogged about this. Rather, about how people know about the fares. And this is going to be me slagging on Germany and Berlin specifically. So, I imagine that if you did, you probably would not even have needed to follow me for this. If you know anything about Germany and public transport, you know that there was something called the €9 ticket in the summer of this year. It was a very well advertised ticket. It had been discussed politically, and the entire media was talking about what it was going to mean, where all public transport in Germany, with the exception of intercity trains, was covered by a single nationwide €9 monthly pass for each of the months of June, July, August. It's calendar month rather than 30 days, but it's €9. If you're a tourist and you're in Germany mid-month to mid-month, you're still getting €18. Say thanks. And the upshot is that so everyone knew that it was going to happen. People were already making plans based on this. For example, people were making sure that they would take trips during the 3-month window and not just outside it, which you would expect to result in less intercity rail ridership in May. As I said, intercity trains were not covered, but public transport at the destination city would be covered. And yet, in May, ridership on intercity trains was actually up just because of post-corona recovery. But then there was a massive surge, as you might expect, in June, July, August. Again, it was very well advertised. It was a nationwide thing. Essentially, I would buy a €9 ticket from, let's say, Berlin, from like a Berlin machine. And through some kind of mechanism of cost sharing, I don't know how exactly, but the ticket should be valid even if I'm riding a regional train in Saxony, or if I'm riding the U-Bahn in Munich. And so this was a good example of fair payment UI, by which I mean people knew that it existed and it was very easily available. However, this ended in August, which the kind of free fares people are against. I'm not a free fares person at all, but again, we're discussing UI, we're not discussing fair payment. The origin of the €9 ticket was that we have a rather cranky finance minister, who believes himself to be the internal opposition to the within the coalition. So he will just say things just to remind people that he exists. Things that are very oppositional to the coalition's actions, just to remind people that he exists and he is oppositional. And they emphasize that he does this because, for example, the Green Party in Germany is also in the coalition, and the Green Party has strenuously disagreed with the senior partner of the coalition, SPD, on matters like Ukraine. The Greens are much more pro-Ukraine party than SPD is. The collaborationist impulses within Germany, they tend to vote for moderate SPD or moderate CDU, or for FDP. They never vote Green. And so the kind of people who think, the kind of people at SPD who supported, let's say, more gas pipelines, like Nord Stream 2, or further gas cooperation with Russia, or now with China, these people ran the show at SPD, and the Greens were trying to fight that, eventually successfully, days before the invasion began. But the Greens were not trying to make a show of it. No, the Ukrainians know. No, bear in mind, the Ukrainians know. The Ukrainians know that Foreign Minister Baerbock, for example, supports them. They don't hate her. They hate certain SPD people. They don't hate Baerbock. But Lindner, the finance minister, in contrast, constantly slows things down because of this internal opposition thing. And one of the internal opposition things he did was, as people were talking about using less oil, like doing oil and gas sanctions on Russia, which ended up being resolved in Putin essentially cutting Germany off without Germany making the first move. What he said, there's inflation, said Linda, so we need to reduce fuel prices to give something to the driver. So increasing fuel consumption at a time when reductions are needed. It was called, he insisted on it, and so the compromise was that in exchange there would also be an essentially free, that is to say €9 public transit ticket. Subsequently, people who are transport activists in Germany, instead of thinking more about reliability, which was terrible during the summer, they thought about extending something like the €9 ticket, which is again is being politically debated, so people know that there are debates about whether to extend it, but some of the actual extensions have not been very well advertised. So Berlin specifically, so September was a full fair month, and then October was not. In Berlin, the decision was that starting October, there should be a €29 monthly ticket, initially for 3 months, but they will reevaluate and probably extend it. Now, owing to some interagency bullshit, this is not available widely. What I mean is, so first of all, it's a Berlin thing, not a national thing. There is a national thing starting January, which is the €49 ticket on the same terms as €9. So one ticket is good everywhere in Germany except on intercity trains, for 49 a month, not 9. And if you ask me, it should be more like 100. But at any rate, the €29 ticket is something that is exclusively Berlin. So it's Berlin zones AB. It's not usable anywhere else. It's just 29 instead of the previous full fare, which was 86. But this does not mean that they've actually lowered the fare fully to 29. What I mean is that if I take out my BVG app right now and okay, so I don't know I think my phone might be too glary for you guys to be able to see what's in there, so maybe it's not going to be useful, but the BVG ticket app, I'm looking through it right now, and if I'm trying to buy a ticket and it's saying season ticket, monthly tickets, flat rate for a month, again, it's possible that it's too glary and you can't see, but this tells me that it's 86 when it's actually 29. Why? Because because the fares are some kind of interagency agreement within the Verkehrsverbund, due to which the city is allowed to give a subsidy, but only through certain mechanisms, and instead of resolving them, they just went ahead. So if I buy using the app, it's 86. If I buy at a ticketing machine at a train station, even a subway station, so again, not Deutsche Bahn, the S-Bahn, it's still 86. You need to search for the €29 fare. I think I needed to Google it and then figure out the website for Berlin in which I got to apply for one, and buy it using using an annual subscription that starts at 29 a month and is going to revert to 86 if and when they end the program. So if you're a visitor to Berlin, you don't have access to this, even if you visit for a long time. It's something that you need, and it's something that's and it's not like they're saying at the machines, look here for the 29. No, they won't tell you it's 29. It's not advertised anywhere. You need to be following the right papers maybe to see this. But why would I be reading Berlin papers? Like, what reason is there for me to read random city papers? Okay, I mean, maybe about city news, but most of the news that they report are completely irrelevant to me. And so because it's a Berlin only thing, it was not covered anywhere national, which I do read, and so it was poorly covered, and so in Berlin the fare payments have really bad UI because there's only one normally pretty obscure mechanism through which the ticket that the city would like you to use is bought, which again, it's these annual subscriptions, which by the way you can cancel, and yet it's unclear to what extent my €29 subscription is going to be rolled into the 49. So I do not know whether my subscription is going to turn into a €49 monthly at the beginning of next year, which I can then show to anyone outside to any fair inspector, even outside Berlin. I have no idea. It's not being very well discussed. It's not being very well advertised. Um, and again, so I said on Twitch that I'm slagging on BFG. This is not quite a slag on BFG, although I think that if they literally could not sell these at the machines, they should have like posted signs at the machines saying €29 ticket not sold here. Go to this website with a link and a QR code. It's something where I think the city of Berlin screwed this up. They were so eager to reduce the fares. So I should probably blame the Berlin Greens, the party that I voted for, because bad as they are, I would still prefer them over our mediocre mayor, Franziska Giffey. In demanding what was essentially just a discount on the Berlin monthly. So this is something that's really that's really important to get right. You need to make sure that the fare payment UI is easy, which means it should be available anywhere. There need to be ticketing machines at train stations. There's sometimes a tendency in certain places that like their smart cards not to sell tickets at stations. These people are extremely hostile to customers. There's sometimes a tendency to make everything go exclusively by app or do something that you cannot get by app. You should do it by all means possible. So this means that every train station needs a ticketing machine. This includes trams. If your tram system is very infrequent and there are too many stops, first of all, you should consolidate stops. But second, you can put the machines on the trams. You can buy you can buy tickets at you can buy a ticket on the trams. In Zurich, you can even buy a ticket at every bus station. Like they have a ticketing machine where you can buy a monthly at every bus station in Zurich. Again, this there should be an app option, payment by app. There should be. I mean, if you want to do an annual subscription, you can do an annual subscription, but you should not. But people should not need to give, like, to key in their address, for things like this. Again, there might be an option that is personalized to you, and then maybe you should key in an address. But there should be a ticket that costs the same, not more, not a little more for a tourist surcharge, the same. And again, sold over many different venues, which again normally Germany is very good at. It's just that specifically in the attempt to partially extend the €9 ticket, they screwed this over. They screwed this. No, they didn't screw this over. They screwed this up, and this is a really useful example of how even places that generally do it well can screw up and essentially politically panic, and how transit advocacy that is not technically literate, which unfortunately Berlin Green transit advocacy isn't, can make things worse. So fair payment UI again needs to be through many mechanisms, mechanisms that don't assume that the passenger is a pauper, but also don't assume that the passenger is extremely tech literate. You need, again, to cast a wide net. Public transport is public. It's for everyone. Even for people who still think that typing is weird. I mean, we all make fun of boomers, but boomers should be able to ride trains as well. And again, it's something that's very easy to screw up, as Berlin did, just because it's not usually noticed until it goes wrong. In this case, it went wrong, but by then they'd already made the political decision. Same thing with wayfinding. Nobody notices it until people get lost. Auditory overload, sometimes sensory overload sometimes visual overload if the lighting is too harsh. The announcements, the train arrival boards, if they're wrong, people notice them when they're wrong, not when they're right. So it's something that people don't naturally notice, and yet it is incredibly important. I think I'm done with the rant right now, so I think I'm just going to take questions if people have any. It looks like a shorter stream than usual. And I am worried that people posted things without no. So yeah, you can post questions in chat. I will answer. And if not, and if people don't have questions, we can just end at 8:10 and make it an hour stream like I did last time. What countries? Oh, what city's transit system would I want to ride when I'm Boomer? I don't know, and the reason is that Boomer means a bunch of things. So, actually, from the perspective of like disability, Berlin is very good. Berlin is actually really accessible. And the so again, Boomer means a bunch of things. This is one of them. Another is Boomers don't work because Boomers are retired, and so now I work from home, so I have a different travel pattern, but my entire social circle works outside home, and therefore their general movements are based on normal urban work, and as a result, even their non-work trips, which is where I meet them, let's say queer meetups or gaming meetups, even then, it's based on places that are convenient to people who have jobs within the ring. Boomers, so retirees in general don't do this. So retiree socialization is very different, often much more neighborhood centric, because again, nobody works. People have also had more time to form community ties. So the answer is that I don't know. Again, it's something that Berlin is very good at. But I can't tell you about, again, things about like age-based differences other than questions of accessibility. I mean, I guess older people get more easily irritated by noise, like more sensitivity to noise, and this is something where I would much prefer to be in Europe or the United States or in Asia over the United States. The United States is really bad at limiting this kind of overload. Oh, thanks, Green. It's an overload again. There's kind of idea that the overload is just the writers being noisy, but it's not the writers, it's the system being noisy. The writers are fine. People, there's kind of a tendency, I think it's a mostly American tendency, although I've seen it in Germany to some extent as well, of people just looking down mightily on the writers, and they think they're looking down on writers from different social classes from them. When you're seeing these kind of complaints about safety on the subway that vastly exaggerate subway crime, or that take incidents of, let's say, someone falling onto the tracks and being killed by a train and conflate that with criminal homicide. So criminal homicide you probably will solve with better policing. You're not going to solve people falling onto the tracks with better policing. You will solve them with something very different. In this case, it would be it would be barriers, platform edge doors, but or there's this kind of mentality in New York. It's been for many times, for many years, many times, where people complain about the buskers, but the buskers don't hurt anyone. They don't really bother anyone. The auditory overload, again, is something that the system does much more than the users. A grading system based on user experience would be cool, yeah, but I don't know how to grade it, and the reason is that it's such a personal thing that, yes, I can discuss with other people, but it's not something that I can very easily just look up. Okay, I don't know how good Tokyo is. Maybe I can talk to people who've lived there, or maybe people who have visited, but I would need to ask them very specific things. And remember, UI UX is not noticed until something goes wrong. So it's possible I'm going to ask the wrong questions. And I said, this is someone who has been studying construction costs for a living for about 3 years. I've been studying construction costs not as a living for about 13. You need to know what questions to ask, because if you only talk to people who have, let's say, bad experience, people who've only supervised bad projects, the things that they will say are obvious, are things that people who have experience with both good and bad projects will not agree are obvious at all. And so it's something that requires much deeper study, and like essentially I can only tell you the UX in cities that I've lived in, and I'm counting New York even though I haven't lived there in over 11 years because I visit so often. And so I can tell you that among the systems that I've lived in, Paris and Berlin are better than New York. I don't remember Vancouver. I don't remember Stockholm anymore. I mean, I don't remember being annoyed in Stockholm, but I lived in Stockholm 2014 to 2016. I don't remember being annoyed in New York in 2014 to 2016. It's something much more recent. So I can't even tell you how a city that I lived in 6.5 years ago is. It's something that, I'm sure there are people who do this at least semi-professionally, but it's something that requires, again, it's much more personal, which essentially means that cities need to just have horizontal two-way ties, like horizontal bilateral ties, where people in New York get to visit, and I don't mean top management, I mean people my age or ideally 5 to 10 years younger, get to visit Paris, get to be seconded to Paris, Berlin, Taipei, Seoul, Tokyo, London, and then they can report about these things, as well as many other things. But at this point, I can't give you the grading system, unfortunately, Sami. Have I answered your questions, both Secretary Perkins, Dan, and Sami? And if I have, are there other questions? Ooh, glad. Thanks for watching. I'll ask one more time if there are any other questions, and if there aren't, followed by the minute of awkward pause because of the lag, then we can end this after an hour. And honestly, given that the streams are getting shorter, I might do a stream on Saturday rather than waiting an entire week. So I might just do 2 streams a week if I get a good topic for Saturday. No promises, but follow me on I still post these on Twitter, and unless Twitter literally stops existing, I'm going to post stream links, blog links, World War III reel, but also on Mastodon. You should follow me on Mastodon, which is where note that I'm posting this on Twitter. This is my Masto. This is my my username on Fedi. I have a Discord, which I will freely invite anyone who asks to be invited. I don't post the public link because I'm worried about scrapers and I'm worried about spammers, but you can share with your friends. You can share with your enemies. And again, if you send me an email or comment on my blog, and it will then send you an email, that's fine. I mean, this is where I am going to announce things, many things, but also things related to this stream. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you again either in a week or in 4 days to be decided, with another topic also to be decided. So thank you, and ciao ciao.